This show is produced by the Hartman Media Company. For more information and links to all our great podcasts, visit hartmanmedia.com.
Welcome to the Holistic Survival Show with Jason Hartman. The economic storm brewing around the world is set to spill into all aspects of our lives. Are you prepared? Where are you going to turn for the critical life skills necessary to survive and prosper? The Holistic Survival Show is your family's insurance for a better life. Jason will teach you to think independently, to understand threats, and how to create the ultimate action plan. Sudden change or worst case scenario, you'll be ready. Welcome to Holistic Survival, your key resource for protecting the people, places, and profits you care about in uncertain times. Ladies and gentlemen, your host, Jason Hartman.
It is my pleasure to welcome Melody Wright to the show. She is a housing analyst and strategist and involved in real estate technology as well. She has some really interesting insights onto the market, and I want to get those from her today. Melody, welcome. How are you?
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's good to have you. So it sounds like you are really looking at some different data than a lot of the others out there, and we want to get into that. But first, tell us about your background. Sure. You have extensive experience in the mortgage world. Just give us an overview of your background.
Sure. So I fell into mortgage by accident in 2006, for lack of a better idea. I fell into a company called ResCap, which was a top 5 originator and servicer back in the day as a project analyst. This was right as Cerberus Private Equity had purchased us, and they needed kind of a Girl Friday to help them understand the business. So I was kind of in the FP&A group. So really got my feet wet, understanding mortgage, both from an origination and servicing side in corporate finance. And then kind of once we got into a lot of trouble, I helped with our consent orders and AG settlement. And those, for people that don't know, are kind of the slap on the hand that we got from, all the regulators for administrative errors in mortgage servicing. So once I kind of did that, I went on to help with our bankruptcy. GMAC ResCap filed bankruptcy in 2012. And after that, my servicing president came to me and asked to help manage the default crisis. So I did that for a while. After that, I went out to a whole bunch of non-bank servicers and originators, trying to help sort of, with process efficiency, et cetera. And all of this compliance came down on our heads after the crisis. But while I was doing that, I realized technology was kind of the only way we were going to get out. So started building a lot of different wraparound solutions for mortgage technology. And then kind of left and went out on my own last year, created my own company, and have been involved in kind of still overseeing some mortgage books, but building technology for the space.
Okay, great. So you're still in the mortgage business, it
Correct.
Sounds like. And
Yep.
Mortgage, is that really your main, is that your main income source, mortgage?
Not really. The technology component, I'm working on actually a short-term rental technology right now. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, so tech is your main thing, it sounds like, right?
Yeah, I kind of don't have a main thing. I'm a 25, 25, 25, 25 kind of girl.
Got it. Yeah, a lot of us are that way nowadays. I get it. And by the way, I love how you said Girl Friday. I haven't heard that expression since I was a kid, and my mom had a Girl Friday in her office. That's great.
Right.
I love it.
Yeah.
Nowadays, you might get in trouble for saying something like that.
I know. I can say it, right? You can't.
You can say it. I can't. Yeah, exactly.
That's right.
Melody, I was reading some of your stuff and watching one of your videos. You're rather pessimistic about the housing market. So we might debate that a little bit, but tell us why, or if that's actually true, or make there's obviously always a lot of layers to this stuff, right?
That's right.
I'll let you explain. Yeah.
Housing is very hard to understand. It's like the Titanic, and it's very local until it's not. And so I also believe in the business cycle, and that, but I have to be honest with you. One of the reasons that I am a little pessimistic, I'm not a crash bro. I'm not, people call me a doomer, but in reality, I'm just talking about the path. I'm not as interested in prediction. And I think the headwinds that we have right now, we've heard a lot about a sort of inventory being short. And I think that is because a lot of people don't understand what structurally happened after, how we got out of 2008, which is Wall Street came in, sort of aided with Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, or the GSEs, to sort of, take these properties off the hands of the banks. And I happen to be one of those. I was at those auctions, watching this happen. And so what Wall Street did at that point was kind of, that was a long-term rental play. Everybody started getting involved with fixing and flipping, et cetera. And the short-term rental play kind of entered the scene. And, there's nothing wrong with that I think there's always going to be a short-term rental market. But as with everything, when people get really excited, they get overexcited. And so they start making, with some of these DSCR lenders, for instance, people that would have purchased just one property instead purchased 10. And so they became really overly leveraged. And what a lot of people miss is that 30% of the market in the COVID boom were all cash sales. And so a lot of people are looking to mortgage as where the trouble is going to start. And now it's actually starting faster than I anticipated there, but that's not my main focus. I think these all cash sales weren't all cash sales. They were levered either through kind of, loans on equity, loans on crypto, these personal money loans that wealth management does, et cetera. And then you have people.
So I want to give that a name, Melody,
okay,
so people can understand that. So normally, and I've done extensive analysis of the mortgage market, and so have you, of course. And, it looks like people are extremely comfortable, right? But what you're talking about is like what I'll call shadow leverage. Okay.
That's right.
So the leverage is not actually tied. Now I don't know if I agree, but I just want to give this a name
100%,
concept.
yeah.
So what you're saying is the leverage is out there. It's just not tied to the property. So it doesn't show up in the statistics, right?
Not in the same way. And quite honestly, if you're not looking at county records, so a lot of people will quote mortgage data. Well, that's mortgage data. The county records are more going to tell you how many sales there actually were. And so I'm talking about the sales that aren't tied to a traditional mortgage, that were conceivably all cash. And a lot of what was happening is people would cash out refi of a larger property, and then they would use that cash to buy another one. Because people, real estate is, I think a good investment. It's a hard asset, right? So people were sort of saying, what can I do with this cash? And so we had a lot of investors come into the market. And so I can't tell you an absolute number on this. I'm talking, my anecdata, what I experienced. I work with DSCR lenders. I talk to people, et cetera. And, I see the advertisements from PNC and other big banks for these wealth management units that were trying to help people compete in the market with these personal loans. So you can dig into balance sheets, but it's very difficult to understand exactly how much of this shadow leverage is out there. So my thesis is multifaceted. That's one component.
Okay, so before you move on to the next component, that shadow leverage, though, doesn't show up in the real estate statistics necessarily. However, it does show up in general because we have all sorts of stats on how much credit is in the market, whether it be student loans, auto loans, or just personal loans. We know what the government debt is, the corporate debt, the personal debt, the household debt.
Yep.
It does show up. It's just not directly
tied to real estate. That's correct.
Okay,
yep.
Go ahead.
Yep. So, that's one component. The other component, I'll have to say, is the inventory. So one thing that I understood or kind of was putting this together last year and just seeing that the housing dynamics, how quickly homes were appreciating, listening to Ivy Zellman, who has been in this space for a very long time, understanding.
But she has been very wrong too. I just want to point that out.
Well, I'm not here to debate Ivy. But what I will say is that she has a proprietary builder survey. So there was a lot that she understood that others didn't, but I also think she gets some things wrong as well that I'll talk about. But what I do know about sort of my industry, the title companies, the title companies are involved, whether there's a mortgage or not, is that they have terrible technology, terrible reporting systems. And so it is very difficult for anyone to understand how many transactions happened until much later down the road. And so much
later is what, 2 or 3 months later, you mean, right?
No.
Oh, what do you mean?
No, I think that because of these, you're pulling county records. We have over 3,000 counties in this country, some of which are not even have any kind of electronic records. And so I believe we probably won't know exactly how many sales happened for probably another year or so. It takes a long time because there is no technology, and you have 3,000 independent little counties that, by the way, weren't staffed during COVID. Nobody was there. It would take almost, in some counties, it takes already a year to record a mortgage and to record these documents. But in COVID, it was even longer. So that's
okay. So let's just unpack that for a second.
Sure.
So I agree with you that some counties are very primitive, but those tend to be really small counties that sort of like they wouldn't impact the stats that much. I mean,
Los Angeles was on a year delay in COVID for recording.
Wow. But is that delay still true?
Oh, I can get you the stat after this, but I can tell you that there are counties still today that 6 to 8 months delay. And Los Angeles, I can almost guarantee has not caught up. They're probably at a 6 months delay right now.
Okay. But, then I guess it depends what data you're using. Are you using MLS data? Are you using county recorder data?
That's,
with a combination of like MLS data and Zillow, it seems like, and Redfin does some great stats. I mean, it seems like you pretty much got the market covered.
No. So here's the problem. So I'm a believer in triangulation of data. So I don't look at one data source. So you've got county records. You've got over 600 MLS in this country, 600, and literally no one has connection to all of them. The listing site that has that much connection is realtor.com, and they are connected to 99.6, but not all those MLSs syndicate. In the actuality, Zillow has some of the lowest number of listings on its site. You're better off going somewhere like realtor.com. And so a lot of people don't understand this whole syndication with MLS, which is if you're a local MLS, some people can choose not to send those listings to those bigger sites. That's one component. And then there's something that a lot of people want to say doesn't happen, but that's the pocket listings that essentially you can look at. There was a recent article in Inman about Austin where almost 50% in these certain neighborhoods in Austin during the boom were being transacted outside of the MLS. And so people argue this isn't a big component, but it was big enough that NAR in 2015 was very worried. And I can tell you,
I know there's been litigation over the pocket listing thing. First of all, a pocket listing is a listing that doesn't go into the MLS. A realtor sells it, but they don't put it in the MLS to sell it. But usually, I'd say almost always, that realtor is going to enter it in the MLS just as a comp after they sell it. So it's still going to be in the MLS ultimately, even if it didn't start that way, because they want to get credit for it. The other comment you made about syndication, and some MLS is not syndicating. Well, every real estate agent wants as much exposure for their property as possible, and so does the owner. So why would they not want to syndicate?
Because that's not exactly true. They want to keep that to themselves. And so like one of the workarounds people are using for syndication is you can put a listing on for 21 days is coming soon and market it. And this is an end run around the NAR requirements. And so what they'll do is they'll actually do all this marketing, sell that home behind the scenes. And as soon as it kind of hits, people start reaching out, like it's through that coming soon period, and they'll be told, no, it's already gone. And it then creates even more of this FOMO. And so there's a lot of different ways. Okay. And I think we make a lot of assumptions.
Okay. So let's just unpack that one. Melody, you're really bringing up some great points here. I love it. So let's unpack that one for a second too. Okay. Why would an agent want to keep the listing to themselves, right? They want to do that because they're greedy and they want to double end it, or that broker wants it to double end within the company. So either the agent themselves wants to double end the listing, and that means they get more commission, or the brokerage itself wants to double end it within the office. So maybe different, some of these offices have 200 agents, right? My traditional company that Coldwell Banker bought had 65. Okay. So, they want to double end it within the company, right? Maybe. But the only time in which they can kind of like get away with that is in a strong seller's market. They usually can't get away with that in a buyer's market or a market that's not that strong. And, the owner, the seller, is not going to allow that if they can, because they want the most exposure they can get to get the biggest price, right? So tell us about that dynamic.
In a frozen market, they don't want to list. They're scared because
who's they? The seller?
The seller, because everyone understands. There was this great sort of meme on Twitter last week of, you have to stay strong, don't sell your house. But everyone understands if they list their house and they don't get that price and their neighbors are watching, right? They could be the ones that sort of start the waterfall. And in this Inman article, I really recommend it to everyone, really spoke to that precisely, is that they're holding it back because they believe it's worth something, and they're being told that if they list it, that likely they're not going to get that, and they're being told to wait. And so a lot of times these conversations are happening behind the scenes because the seller is under the impression they're going to get more for that than what they would get in this frozen housing market right now.
Yeah, I'm sure all of this happens. I just can't imagine it's a very big impact. I mean, I have conversations with agents like many times a day, that are out there doing the traditional real estate thing. A lot of my friends do that. I look at all the stuff they post in realtor groups on Facebook. Yep. I know that everything you say does happen, but it's just a little drop of water in the pond, probably. I don't know. You seem to think it's a big amount.
I mean, 50% in certain neighborhoods in Austin is not a drop. And I would say...
Right, overall, but 50% is people that are not going in the MLS, you're saying, in Austin, right?
Yeah,
okay, so
in
Austin,
certain neighborhoods.
Yeah,
but it's all over the place. I recommend everyone kind of check, because that's really, to your point, Jason, I think what people have problem understanding is it's not just one thing. It is several strings, and that's my thesis. And so that's just one.
Fair enough. Yeah, it's always many factors, that's why this stuff is not simple. But it's many factors on the negative side and many factors on the positive side.
100%.
So those,
that's right.
Anyway, so go ahead. Take us to your next point. This is great.
So kind of the next point, I believe, really is on these short-term rentals as a big part of it, and just the oversaturation. So something that Airbnb does, when you search a property in Austin, it's going to come back with only 300 listings. That's it. That's all you can see. And in the top, it's going to say 1,000 plus listings in this city. In reality, there's 14,387 listings in Austin, for instance.
For Airbnb.
And so then some people are going to say, well, that could include apartments now, et cetera, a room. Yes. But on average, 85% of those are actually whole homes. And there's been a great study by Inside Air on Dallas specifically, who recently just enacted that legislation. So the short-term rental market is oversaturated by design. That is Airbnb's only, you can see the CEO going out this week talking about, how they're broken, they need to be fixed, because their only business model was oversaturation. The more listings they got, that was their growth plan. They talked a little bit about experiences, but that was it. And so they really weren't taking into consideration what happens to their hosts when a market becomes oversaturated.
Right.
And
typical Airbnb. Airbnb is such a sellout company. They're just a greedy big tech company like all the others. They want to get so many hosts on their platform because it's not their expense, right? Go get someone else to take all the risk, right? And I'll tell you, Melody, here I'm going to agree with you 100%, because I have been saying for 12 years that Airbnb, go back and listen to my old episodes. I can't wait till the AI gets good enough to search every little word in all my episodes, because I'm going to use that like crazy, because I was just right about everything except interest rates. I've been wrong about that many times. But anyway, I've been saying that Airbnb has never been through a real recession. COVID doesn't count. That wasn't a real recession. Airbnb is way overbuilt. And if you look at all of the massive increase in non-primary beds in the world, that's what I call them, it's just insane. And the first thing people stop doing when you get into a recession is they stop going on vacation.
Right.
And I completely understand that Airbnb is not just for vacation. Okay.
Right.
But that's the big part of it, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And one of the proxies for that I always talk about, I don't know if you've ever heard me say this, is look at the rise of all these new mattress companies. Where did they come from? Where did Tuft & Needle, Casper, Purple, all these mattress companies that came out of the blue was to satisfy largely a big part of their market was the Airbnb market. Too many non-primary beds. At the same time that Airbnb had its rise over the last 12 years or so, I mean, it started before that, but we didn't really notice it. So I'm going to call it a 12-year run. New hotel rooms have been built. Okay. It's not like hotels are going out of business.
Exactly.
There's lots of hotels in the world and there have been more built, right? And then you've got this massive expansion in Airbnb beds. So it just doesn't make any sense.
No. Yeah. And you call it a technology company. It's some of the worst technology I've ever seen. And I think I call it, fintech fantasies where people come in, build this really basic platform.
Right. Yeah.
And then try to act like but every time you ask Airbnb about their technology advancements, I mean, there's just no answer. So I totally agree with you. And so that's one component. Something I've been doing, I track 70 cities myself. And, I list the listings for sale, listings for rent, as well as the short-term rental listings, because a lot of people, if you haven't been in this space, they're going to say, well, it says 1,000. I mean, there's not that many Airbnbs. How could this possibly be true? But it is. There's 7,000 of these things in Vegas. I mean, it's actually unbelievable. And so many people actually built for Airbnb. So something else I was going to talk to you about, like that short-term rental, I've done some spaces with some people that got out early and they were involved in groups, especially in Appalachia, kind of where I am now, where they would build specific homes just for short-term rental. And then they'd sell them on Facebook and they'd go in an hour. I mean, and these Facebook groups are just out of control. And so everybody, and another thing I saw on the road, and that takes me to built to rent. So let's leave short-term rental. So built to rent also worked.
But short-term rentals, give us a number on that? I mean, the surveys I could find that there's about 700,000 short-term rentals in the country. I say there's about 1 million. Okay. But that doesn't solve the inventory problem. Well, you don't think the inventory is a problem, but I'm calling it a problem.
We'll go there. What's available is a problem, but there's about 1.5 million out there in the US. So that's the legit number theoretically.
Okay. So let's go with your number. So there's just over 500,000 homes for sale in the US. My idea of
600 now, but
534,000. Okay, that's the number, right? That's the latest from Altos, at least.
Oh, no. We can't use Altos, and I can tell you why.
All right.
Let's use the Fed's number, okay?
All right. But don't use NAR's number because it includes the pendings and the contingents, and I don't like their number. But it's fine if you compare it with the past, then it's reasonable. It's the same comparison. But the thing about the Airbnb thing is some of those homes aren't really meant to be Airbnb homes necessarily. There were a lot of people in the world before Airbnb even existed. I mean, I've been in this business a very long time that had second and third homes, people with some means, right? Yeah. And they didn't even rent them. Now Airbnb just gave them an opportunity to make use of them and get some income.
50 million second homes in this country right now.
Okay, got it. So not all of the Airbnbs, my point 100%. Being that I agree that there's Airbnb shadow inventory, no question. Right. I'm just saying, and in some markets, it's profound. Okay. Right. There's a lot of it in places like Arizona, in Phoenix Metro, in Austin, and Nashville and Vegas. Yeah. Those markets are oversaturated with Airbnb properties. Right. Okay. Totally. But not all of those properties will ever end up hitting the market.
Totally.
Okay. Yeah.
Yep. And so that's just one component, right?
Got it. Go ahead.
So then we go to the built to rent. And so what this was is, first the institutionals got involved and they sort of hired these builders to build these spec homes for rent, like American Homes for Rent, Starwood, Blackstone, et cetera. And so there'd be whole subdivisions of these things built. And when I went out on the road, it would be really kind of interesting. You would go to a subdivision that wasn't completed. There'd be one home completed, just one out of 200, and it would have a little for rent sign right in the yard. And these were typically in your excerpts. The idea was supposed to be rental, theoretically affordable rental. But then, the institutionals started pulling back. American Homes for Rent, they've become net sellers, except for one all in the family deal recently between Starwood and Blackstone. But they have stopped this. And American Homes for Rent has actually sold some of these subdivisions that they were building for rent as single family homes. And so what happened is the institutionals got in, then every, Tom, Dick, and Harry wanted to get in as well. And they started this almost like a multi-level market marketing thing where but you would contact a broker and say, hey, I want one of these long-term rentals, and what that broker would do would go out and find, and you'd read a pamphlet, and sight unseen, you would kind of build this for spec. And so that's a lot of what was happening. And now out on the road, what I've seen are tons of these empty subdivisions of this build for rent that is, going to put pressure, because then we move to the multifamily, which, construction at this point is the highest since the 70s. And you and I might disagree on this, but we don't have the demographics to support it. And so what you're seeing in a lot of the same cities that have that oversaturation of the short-term rental and the build for rent, because they're the Sunbelt happening cities, they also are getting a ton of delivery of multifamily. And I've got a great schedule, and I'll share it with you later if you'd like to see it for a visual of what those deliveries look like in these cities, which are already sitting at
apartment complexes.
That's correct. Multifamily apartment complexes. And so they're already sitting at a pretty significant above average vacancy, even before kind of this multifamily is going to hit. At the same time, the built for rent. And at the same time, you're going to have some of this short-term rental. And a lot of people, what they did is they pivoted from long-term rental to short-term rental, especially if they were trying to get financing, because you could use certain technologies in this space like AirDNA, look up a property, and it would say to you, your average daily rent is X, and your average occupancy is Y. But in one of my Substacks, I do a great example of a property in Kyle, Texas, which happened to be a property one of my mortgage clients has, where it was a second home and likely built for either short-term or long-term rental. But the technology I was using said that they would get $600 a day in Kyle, Texas, which is 22 miles south of Austin.
I can't imagine that.
That's not going to happen. Yeah. And so a lot of people were led to believe that they would make a lot of money. And the DSCR lenders, I know responsible lenders in this space, but they relied on that technology as well, and really kind of said, okay, what can you make? And so people pivoted from long-term rental to short-term rental, because you can make $10,000 a month theoretically versus, that $2,000 you might have made with a long-term rental. And so that's another component. And then, I talk about the demographics.
Okay, well, wait a second. You went back into short-term rentals. Yeah, so I thought we were talking about build for rent. So
we were. I just kind of gave an example that these spaces bleed over. And so as people realized they could get more for a short-term rental, they pivoted to that. And so, that took a lot of the long-term rental off the market, actually. And so that build for rent made a lot of sense as rents were skyrocketing during COVID, because people thought that we had a paucity of long-term rental as well. But what had actually happened is people pivoted more to short-term rental. So
so on the long-term versus short-term rental, most of those short-term rental properties are more expensive properties that don't make sense as long-term rentals. Okay.
Some of them, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, some aren't, but most of them are higher priced, and the rent evaluations aren't good on long-term rentals. And that's why these people are in trouble. Okay. Absolutely. Because they can't get the properties to pencil. Had they purchased a bunch of entry-level houses, they could just turn them into long-term rentals and it wouldn't be a problem.
You're absolutely right.
When you own a $700,000 or $1.5 million Airbnb property, you can't convert that and make it make sense, not even close. Okay. That's right. So those tiers of the market are going to suffer more because they're going to dump a little more inventory into that market. But on the build for rent, though, Melody, that's what I wanted to ask you about, is who owns those build for rent properties? I mean, those are institutional owners with big money, and are they the ones you're saying are or will be in distress? Or ferret that out for us a little bit.
Well, they've already become net sellers of these. They got out early 22, but it was your smaller mom and pops that kind of got involved. When I was down in Florida, was there recently, talking to someone in this build for rent space, and it became local groups, like groups of smaller investors that wanted to do this. So it's how it always goes. The institutional start, and then everybody thinks it's a great idea. They start piling in, and things were starting to not pencil. And so this gentleman I was speaking to told me he's the lone voice still in the room telling people, you got to stop. And one of the big builders, he was working for an institutional, they were putting like 200 homes in the ground, like every month. Like it was a huge factory, but it all kind of died down in 22, and those institutions became net sellers. And then you had sort of more of your smaller investors kind of get involved. And those are the ones that I think, just like I was kind of explaining to you, I'm Joe Schmo, I want to buy a long-term rental, help me find one. Where can I find one? And I got to tell you, these people contact me on Twitter all the time, looking to invest in a space, looking for that one property that's going to be, their passive income. And so we have a lot of smaller mom and pops that took on leverage in this space. And this is where, I wasn't going to talk about demographics, but I can move to mortgage now if you want to, because it kind of plays here.
Well, I'm kind of wondering on the build to rent space. Yep. I mean, I guess your point is that those portfolios that the institutional owners purchased are going to not perform very well in terms of appreciation.
That's right.
But like I always say, people only have three choices: buy, rent, or be homeless.
Yep.
So if they stay in the renter pool, that'll ultimately put upward pressure on rents. I mean, rents have decelerated a bit, but they've decelerated from like a crazy fever pitch.
Yeah.
So,
well, I think that's because people misunderstand the inventory picture and how much of this is out there. And I did a great Substack called Down and Dirty that goes over the permits, how much are slated for build for rent out there. And so when you have the build for rent and the multifamily together, they're going to be competing. And so a lot of the build for rent was—
And the build for rent, you're saying, is single family homes, that when you say that.
Single family homes. Yep. And the multifamily. So what you're seeing—
big apartment complexes.
Apartment complexes is that in the exurbs, you have a lot of this built for rent kind of further out, but in more close to the cities, you have these beautiful luxury multifamily buildings that are just popping up everywhere. And there's too many of them. And so these people are going to be competing. So your multifamily and your build for rent, as well as any of your short-term rental people that want to stay in the game and maybe are going to list for long-term rental, which we see that. And that's one of the reasons I track all three, is kind of how the listings move from listings for sale to listings for rent to short-term rental. And so that's what I think a lot of people are missing, is that the inventory is exploding in many, many cities. And again, it's, real estate's local, but then it becomes ultimately a national narrative. Go ahead.
Inventory of... Just be specific about that.
So housing inventory. So I'm talking about all housing stock. And a lot of people, I think, miss this because they talk about one component. They talk about listed for sale versus what's listed for rent versus what's the short-term rental. And so they miss that all of this housing stock that's out there, because it seemed like it all disappeared because Wall Street bought a lot of it up in 2012, 13, 14. It didn't disappear. It just went into the long-term rental market. And then ultimately, because those homes for sale were off the market, then our builders started getting involved. And we haven't even started talking about that, which is, and they're building not just for single.
But the institutional owners own like somewhere around 3 million homes.
It's
right?
a lot. Yeah.
I mean, that's compared to mom and pop investors who are renting properties, they own there's a total of about 18 million or so, maybe 20 million out of the housing stock of 140 million units.
Right,
so
those numbers are from when, right?
Yeah, they're a little hard to get a handle on these numbers.
Correct, because they're census numbers, and we don't get updates on housing stock every year like we do population.
Yeah, totally get it. But I'm just saying, like, we're going with what we can get, okay? So, sure. But my point is that the institutional build for rent owners of single family homes that's a bigger number than ever, but compared to the broader market, that's still not that big a number.
So again, this is why this is multi-layered, and so all these numbers add up, and I'll move quickly just the demographic piece, because here I very much, there was a Harvard study in January about how we pulled forward household formation during COVID, and so to me, and it gives some really nice charts and graphs. And sorry, I would have brought it for you, but it shows basically what we can expect in the next 5 to 10 years. And it is less than what most people are thinking by just looking at pure numbers. And I think I heard on a show you talking about household formation as well. So that's a great a study out there, as well as let's take affordability. I think at this point now, of course, when homes become affordable, we'll have a lot of demand. Don't get me wrong. But because of the unaffordability right now, everybody is going to be looking for the cheapest cost of living. And that's going to be a battle between, homes for sale and homes for rent and the multifamily for rent. And so then we get to kind of the new build. So everybody talks about the fact that we weren't building because of 2008, et cetera, et cetera. And they look backward. And so to me, I'm looking forward at our demographics. We're not having babies the way that we used to. We have boomers retiring who, by the way, are primarily the owners of those second homes, third homes, fourth homes. And what they're experiencing right now, and as they go into retirement, is that the cost to carry that home is increasing exponentially, especially in Florida, where insurance is 4 times the national average. Your taxes are going up because they go off that assessed value in many states.
Right. But if that goes down, then your argument is, the taxes,
If it goes down, absolutely.
Yeah,
but I'm talking about the next, taxes, 3 to 5 years, right? So ultimately, these boomers also realize if they were doing, and a bunch of them have contacted me, if they were doing long-term rental, they're starting to get, hey, I could go invest in short-term treasuries. I could go invest in money market funds. I can make my 5%. Why am I dealing with headaches of pipes breaking, toilets need fixing, et cetera?
There's a great X account that everybody should follow. It's called, the guy's so pessimistic, but he might be right. It's called Triple Net Investor or something like that.
Oh, I've seen that.
Yeah. And he compares here everybody wants these passive income triple net lease deals, right? Mm-hmm. And the one he had the other day was a Chick-fil-A land lease. You probably saw it. And it yielded only 3.5%. Yeah. You can make more money in treasuries.
Exactly.
Yeah. But, to be fair, that's not really the full picture because, of course, there's the land could appreciate. The treasuries, you can't get that for 30 years, right?
Yeah. Listen, long term, that's not my, argument. But we've got 10,000 boomers retiring.
He did have a point, though. Yeah.
Yeah. It's we've got those 15 million vacant homes. Those are money for some of these seniors, and they're going to start kind of trying to catch that cash. And this is a good moment because they could make it elsewhere because they're not going to be around for the next upcycle. And their kids, unfortunately, at this moment, again, they can't afford the upkeep. They literally can't afford it. So, I think that is a big part of these seniors kind of coming out and unloading some of those homes. So the builders, I think, everybody was looking backward and very strong on the narrative that we hadn't built enough, not really realizing that all of those houses kind of got bought up by the institutional investors as well for long-term rental. And we've become more of a rental country, which never thought that would happen in my lifetime. I remember being, yelled at for not buying a house. And now, according to certain sources like Redfin, there's only 4 cities left in the country that it's cheaper to own than rent. And so, these are the choices that a lot of people are being faced with. And so the builders kind of went in gangbusters, and it's not just the nationals. So that's what I think a lot of people don't understand. And people like Zalman, people like Zonda, they have a lot of the builders on their platforms and they have a lot of that inventory, but they miss that as soon as the nationals get involved, the locals also kind of just like you have a CVS right next to a Walgreens, they come onto these sites, these mega sites, and start building as well. And so it's unbelievable when you go out on the road and go to one of the mega sites and you've got Lennar, DH Horton, Pulte, John Cannon, all these different, and then all the local builders. And so there's a real misunderstanding about how much of this new build inventory is out there. And because of the survey of construction is number one, a survey. This is how we get our permit data. There's been some misunderstanding of that as well. But I think you can even see the amount of homes yet to be delivered this year is a bit staggering. And what's interesting, let's take Lennar, for instance. In the last hubbub, they basically delivered, I think, around 38,000. And there was this big article how they said they went crazy. They tried to build too much. This was after their kind of tax.
You probably saw Logan Matashami's article, right? He's been on the show before. And he said new home builders only delivered 76,000 homes, right? And that's just not enough, is his point.
Well, no. So that's So I haven't seen that article, but I would
It's
quibble
on
with
Housing
this.
Wire.
Yeah. So Lennar itself is on record to deliver over 70,000 this year, which is so that two times what they did in this article where they're saying we went crazy, et cetera. So one thing that the Fed doesn't capture is cancellations. And so, cancellations are if I say, hey, builder, I want you to build me a new home, we sign a contract, et cetera, and
I
then we
predicted there
cancel
would
it.
be tons of cancellations when rates went up because the people could no longer afford the house.
That's right.
But what nobody talked about, except yours truly, is that those people that canceled would then go and buy a cheaper house as soon as their psychology got in line with reality. Okay.
Well, a lot of them are building up, right? Like at least in what I've seen out there, they were building up. They were hoping to go from their starter home. So
they were hoping to go from an apartment and buy a first home, right?
Sure.
But they overshot. When the cost of money tripled, they could no longer afford that house. So,
100%.
one of the points that nobody catches, Melody, and it drives me crazy, is that people simply, and it takes a little time for them to capitulate, but they will just ultimately accept less because humans have to do something, right?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, maybe they're not going to get as nice a home as they expected. They're going to have to adjust their expectations ultimately. And that's exactly what happens. That's what happened with all these builder cancellations that happened when rates went up. I predicted that. I spoke about that publicly. I remember being on stage in Las Vegas with 1,100 people in the room saying that was going to happen like 6 months before it happened. And then it did happen. And the news, I said, you're going to hear this in the news. I had slides about it. And the point is, people then recalibrated and they bought a cheaper, lesser house. Tough luck. That's the way it goes. You have to, grow up. You have to just accept less. Okay.
Right. But unfortunately, what's happened is the builders kind of went crazy. And again, I'm not just talking about the nationals, and they didn't see kind of the whole picture. And so a lot of these cities that I've been to, where I've traveled, and there's a lot of video in my Substack, et cetera, of these developments. People weren't talking to city planners. They weren't really understanding, like in Round Rock, Texas, for instance, mile after mile of new builds because they thought an Amazon, warehouse was coming, which it never is. And so we have, and I'm saying this, and people are going to freak out, but we have overbuilt. And now we have a structural issue. Like a lot of what's being built out there is way too expensive for your regular home buyer. Everything I've seen on the road is north of 400K, except of about 3 to 4 of the hundreds of new build sites that I've been on. And so we built for luxury, just like we built multifamily for luxury. So are there affordable homes out there right now? Absolutely not. But what I think will ultimately happen when people understand how much inventory, like this city I went to, Lakewood Ranch in Florida, you almost have two houses for every person there now. When this gets realized, similar to the way Lennar got its tax bailout last time, I think that the government will probably or likely come in and subsidize write-downs as long as the builders sort of pivot to affordable homes. And they're already doing that. There's a lot of government subsidies out there for these for affordable home programs. And it's going to become a very political issue, in my opinion, in 24. And so you're going to see a lot of the builders pivot to affordable housing. So that's another component.
But can they? Like, what does affordable mean? That's such a moving target because the cost of construction is so ridiculously high.
That's exactly the point. And so again, likely the government will probably have to subsidize those write-downs because there will be significant write-downs. When you look out there today at all of the inventory that's north of 400,000, and you realize that less than $25,000, $400,000, right? And less than 25% of our U.S. population can afford that. There is going to have to be write-downs, and so it's a matter of time. But I do believe the government will likely intervene, but it's not going to save some of the builders. And I think a lot of the smaller ones we'll start to see. There was a great tweet just this week from he's an anonymous account at a top 10 builder, and they had a Sunday phone call that where they were told that they're going to give the lots back to some of the developers. Now, it's probably lots that were scheduled for 24 or later, but I think that with the 10-year treasury yield where it is, and in my industry, we watch that thing, with that happening, I think that you're going to see some builders sort of have to mea culpa here as we get to year end.
The question probably everybody is asking after this interview is, So what do I do? Right? Mm-hmm. And the thing I always say is compared to what, right? Okay, your view of real estate is not so rosy, at least in the short term, but what else can you do? Like, what are you going to do if you have capital and you want to grow your capital? Do you have a recommendation?
Well,
or is your recommendation real estate, even with everything you said? I don't know.
So I think that if you can make deals pencil, right, I think this is the time for negotiation. I think, there are distressed sellers out there. We're seeing inventory increasing, in what some may call a non-seasonal time. I think the distress is kind of starting and you can actually negotiate. But honestly, when you can get a 5% return with not doing much of anything, it might just be a good time to kind of wait and breathe. But again, this is not investment advice.
The only problem with that 5% treasury return is it doesn't last very long. In 5 months, 6 months, you gotta go do something else.
Yeah. If you're not leveraged, I'm a big believer in hard assets, but that, when people take on too much leverage, that's what really concerns me. Yeah.
Melody, we could obviously talk about this for 3 days, yes. Which I would love to do sometime.
Yes.
But just go ahead and wrap it up for us, if you would, and give out your website.
Sure. So, kind of just last words, I would just say that I'm looking at all housing stock and sort of layered on top of demographics. So, what I would encourage everybody to do is something we talked about at the beginning of the show, is not rely on one data metric, right? Kind of triangulate. But, would love for people to check me out if they have questions about some of the things I've talked about here today. You can reach me on Twitter at M3_Melody, MELODY. My Substack, M3 Melody Substack, my YouTube, M3 Melody YouTube, and of course on LinkedIn at Melody Wright. But I just want to say thank you so much, and thank you for having me on the show.
Melody Wright, thank you for joining us. Appreciate having you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for listening. Please be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss any episodes. Be sure to check out the show's specific website and our general website, hartmanmedia.com, for appropriate disclaimers and terms of service. Remember that guest opinions are their own, and if you require specific legal or tax advice or advice in any other specialized area, please consult an appropriate professional. And we also very much appreciate you reviewing the show. Please go to iTunes or Stitcher Radio or whatever platform you're using and write a review for the show. We would very much appreciate that. And be sure to make it official and subscribe so you do not miss any episodes. We look forward to seeing you on the next episode.